All right. So I'm recording now. Awesome. All right. So I guess before we get started, there might be a couple people who don't know each other, and so just looking at my screen, we'll just do very quick introductions. Maybe eventually we won't have to do this anymore, but different people join at different times. So just going on my screen, we will start with Dave. Was it?
Yeah, David. Hi. Actually, as an invite from Tony, I work with him. He's at Bismarck State. I'm at Valley City State, which is about 100 miles to his east. And I think we're planning for an April meeting in North Dakota State. So something I have on my calendar now.
Awesome.
Great. It's good to have you, Dave.
Kelly, you want to go next?
Kelly Roos, Bradley University. I'm not telling you anything else.
Fair enough.
That's all you get.
All right. Marie?
Hi, Maria Lopez del Puerto. I'm at the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul, Minnesota, and I'll be coming to the workshop, Dave.
Yeah, do you have that scheduled now?
April 29th, I believe.
Okay. I'll get it up on the events tab.
All right. Ernie?
Ernie Behringer from Eastern Michigan University, and that's in Ypsilanti, Michigan, next to Ann Arbor. And hope to see a lot of you in Atlanta if you're there.
Yeah.
All right. Michelle?
I'm Michelle Kuchera. I'm at Davidson College, which is near Charlotte in North Carolina.
Steve?
Steve Wolf. I'm at East Carolina University. That's in the North Carolina.
All right. And I'm Danny Caballero. I'm at Michigan State in East Lansing. And hopefully I'll be joining Marie at the workshop in North Dakota in April. So just one other thing. Typically what we try to do is ask you to mute your microphone if you're not speaking. That's really just because of feedback from different people's computers. So I'll just kind of try to facilitate, but I will keep my microphone muted unless other people are speaking. So again, the thing that we're sort of talking about today is resources. We're really trying to, as a community, develop resources to help people sort of bring themselves into teaching computation. So there's a lot of ways that we've been trying to do that, actively by bringing people into workshops and so forth, but also providing, online resources for people to, engage with and sort of teach themselves around different things. So I have some prompts here, and they're very minimal. And so just kind of, thinking out loud with folks about what resources would be useful, right? So what did you need when you were getting started? If you haven't got started, what would you need to get started? And if you're already sort of trucking along, what kinds of things do your colleagues need to get started? So I'll shut up now.
So I'll take a stab at it a little bit. I'm very fortunate in my school to have someone who's really a computational physicist. And even he, takes a lot of time to even introduce a particular activity because there's a lot of prep work. And so it's really useful to have the materials available. The problem is that, the PICUP actually tries to address is to make it really easily adaptable. The problem, though, ultimately is you really want the perfect thing for the thing you're going to do in class the next day, right? So that's the hard thing, is to provide in a really big scope of materials to get the hook. And I think that means we need a lot more intro level materials.
One thing that we had talked about at one point that I think might be useful is having little user stories, sort of descriptions of how people use the materials in class, just so that people see the variety. So if it's, your colleague Ernie using it during lecture and introducing it during lecture, and maybe having the activity in class versus sending the students off to maybe do something as homework, etc. I think having those different stories would be helpful for people just to see that, you know, there's all these possible ways in which to introduce it.
Other ideas or other thoughts, other things that people have used that are, you know, around the web, or
So I think for me, it's mainly a time thing. So the exercise sets are the most valuable thing on the website. And so I know the resources tab right now has like one thing listed there about maybe some sort of numerical integration. I don't really remember. But that to me wasn't, well, okay, I guess I'm a computational physicist, but to me it's more the exercise sets that I find the most valuable. So I don't really know the goals of the resources
That, by the way, that's a good point. I'm not sure that we know the goal of the resources tab either. So part of the reason we're trying to have this discussion. So, you know, the exercise sets, of course, in and of themselves are resources and contain a lot of resources within that resource, right? So there's a lot of stuff in there. And as Ernie said, we need to get more. And I agree, we need to get a lot more and a lot more intro stuff. But so I would probably define, and then you can see if you all think this is a good definition. The resources tab would be not necessarily exercise set level stuff, but supporting materials perhaps of some kind. So let me just throw something out that Ernie suggested last summer. And Ernie, I hope you don't mind me using your guitar lesson analogy. So he says, Ernie is a budding Dwayne Eddy, all right? And he says whenever he wants to learn a new song, he goes online into Google and types in the name of a song and guitar lesson, which, by the way, I've started doing too, all right? And so that was something that I thought would be very useful, to have a really quick, whether it's a video or some quick little tutorial thing. For instance, the Euler method, and when is the Euler method and the Euler-Kromer method useful, and under what circumstances? Not necessarily a long drawn-out derivation, right? More just a quick introduction that says this is what it is, maybe a graphical picture to go with it, and then just some wisdom on how to use it. So that's one example of something that could go in there. Other resources, by the way, they may or may not necessarily be in support of teaching as far as the actual classroom stuff. We would like to have resources available for everybody who considers themselves to be pick-uppers to be able to download and use to show what we're up to, that share the vision. And yeah, go ahead, Steve.
I was just going to say, some of the resources that I think would be really valuable are, especially if you're thinking about intro courses, are the kinds of things that like Dwayne or Aaron have made for learning VPython, or just those kinds of things. Because the biggest thing I get when in my classes is, I've never programmed before. To which the answer is, of course, well, now's a good time to start. But,
Yeah, this is a perfect, by the way, Steve, perfect example of the things we're thinking. So this would be in support, right, of all that.
Yeah. And yeah, that's the biggest thing for me. I guess that's about all I have right now.
So I think there's a couple things under the exercise sets that are introduction to VPython and something about Jupyter notebooks that I haven't looked at because I saw them after I've made my own. But I agree that those would be really well suited in the resources tab because I didn't see them originally. I don't know how long they've been there either.
Well, I'm looking at that set right now, and they're hidden. You have to like click more to get to the other.
So one thing that I would propose, and this is feel free to dismiss it as hippie bullshit. Videos of instruction and using good pedagogical practice when it comes to computation. So sort of a video guide or a clip from working in a classroom with students that shows what to do when students are encountering some sort of issue or they're working with something that they're not quite sure on what to do, and how to actually engage the students with that in a pedagogically sound way.
So I have things that I'm doing in my classroom that like I'd be happy to share, but I don't see a lot of resources for assessing the effectiveness of computational teaching methods with respect to physics classes. So like I don't know if I share what I do, if it's pedagogically sound or not.
Fair enough.
I think that would be a perfect thing to go under resources. So Danny, you going to get on that?
Yeah, I got 340 hours of video of students doing computation. You want to dig through it for me?
340 hours? Is that all?
That's it.
Yeah, all right.
It's all intro too.
But yes, Michelle, that should go in there, right? I mean, these are the kind of things we want to eventually have in there.
So Danny, so here's a question. Say that you try something and you'd like to know sort of how effective it is. You can grade the thing directly, but you'd also be interested maybe in long-term effect. But often you may be in a situation where, at least in my situation, I'm sure I'd always have a fairly small number so that I can't get, say, a good p-value or whatever, nothing statistical. So I'm going to be then forced to do sort of a case study analysis or something. Could we get something that's sort of more targeted to computation? I mean, of course, we can go to like the PER user site, but should we be directed there, or should we try to have something more directed to computation?
So, Ernie, is your question with regard to assessment or with regard to?
Yeah, assessment. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think, I mean, so the it's not the what is it called now? Phys-port is what it's called now. So that portal, I mean, focuses on assessment of conceptual understanding mostly, and almost exclusively at the introductory level, especially the tool that they have to do the analysis. And there is no, as far as I know, assessment of student understanding of computation at any level in physics. And developing a standardized assessment of that, I think it's a community effort in terms of understanding, what the various goals are and sort of trying to build something that's the lowest common denominator. It's also a huge undertaking in terms of the development process. And I mean, as somebody so I've authored an assessment of student understanding of classical mechanics, and that was a 5-year project. right. I worked on it as a postdoc, and I continue to work on it, and it's finally like in the final review stage, in physical review now, 6 years later. Like, because it just takes so long to collect data and get feedback and, do the interviews with students to actually, construct the questions in a meaningful way, so that you get information that's useful. And even then, it's still not done, right? I mean, we have some tool that makes some measure of something that people can use. I think it's a really interesting idea, and I would love to work on it. But I think it's a community. I think it needs to involve community input, and then people who have expertise doing assessment design working on it, and then bringing the community back to help inform it. So I think it's a long-term project. It's something that should be done, though.
Are there resources to find like intro to computer science or something, sorts of assessments, not from physics, from the computer science field, to see if we could use anything there for basic programming assessment?
Yes, but I think there's a big difference in writing code as a computer scientist and making a model in physics around some physical system, right? So the basic programming skills are. So this is why I mean I think it's a community driven thing, because so for my intro course, for example, one of my goals is not having students write code from scratch. They never do that in my intro course, right? So I would never have that. They would never develop that programming understanding, because that's not part of the goal, right? Being able to read and interpret some Python code is part of the goal, right? And so having a conversation broadly as a community around what would be the goals at different levels, and then what's the lowest common denominator, and then how do we construct an assessment around that, I think is what would need to be done. Because you could give them a CS, like an intro CS assessment, but it's going to be abstract, and it's going to focus on things that we wouldn't really care about.
Yeah, that's a tricky one, Michelle, just because of the different world that the computer scientists live in. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean, it is so different, and it's not geared toward the way we think when we do scientific computing. So there may be something, but I don't know that it would be too applicable. But along these lines, Danny, can you conceive of something? And I have no idea what this would look like, but it just as a zeroth order attempt to think about it. Can you conceive of something that we could put under that resources where we would get this ball rolling, this community effort, to not do the analysis and the assessment, the expert part of it, but to get the whole thing started? What would that look like?
For assessment, I mean,
just to make it, just to sort of start the process of developing some type of, even if it were a common set of competencies or something.
Yeah, I think that would be a good start, actually, is to sort of to work on, and maybe this is sort of like intersecting a little bit with what Ernie's worked on with the UCTF, is sure. Like, could we as a community come together and say, at these, I mean, our coursework is roughly the same to earn a physics degree, right? I mean, we have the same, probably 2 introductory courses roughly, and 5 core physics courses, modern, classical, quantum, E&M, and StatMech. Is that it? That's 5. Yeah, that sounds like 5. Right. And so I think if we were to sort of work on a set of like learning outcomes for using computing in each of those courses, that was like kind of pretty clear and explicit, like what would be the things that you would actually want to student to learn and sort of have like, we could even have I could even imagine like sort of a core set, right? And then there's sort of sort of a higher level set for if you do more computing or you have more space for it or whatever. Because that's essentially what you would do to start the assessment work. You would have to say, these are the learning outcomes that we're going to try to evaluate with this assessment. And so that could be that could be a thing, right? It could be a way of saying like to the community, here's the kind of learning outcomes that you might entertain when you start to incorporate computation in this course or that course or the other course.
Right. And it makes sense to start there, right?
Yeah, I would agree it would.
I mean, obviously. So by the way, Ernie, do you know, did you participate with, I call them the Ohio Boys, Richard Gass and Steve, oh boy, what's his name? They put together this set of competencies.
No, I didn't.
You know what I'm
No, you told me about this. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, they're more in the high-end computing end of things, right?
Yeah, they're very much into high performance computing, and it's certainly they don't take the approach that Danny would take in outlining learning objectives and learning goals. And so that they have done a lot of thinking that through what an undergrad should for a good computational undergraduate degree, but that's really not what we're talking about here. So I think there's a I don't know, do I dare use the word market for this? So we could do something like this perhaps, Danny. Again, I don't quite know what it would look like on the website under the official resources tab. But maybe if it were a Slack channel, for instance, and a good discussion ensued, maybe we could pop up frequently a summary of the things we've been discussing and come up with, or something like that, as a starting point.
Yeah, I mean, so one thing I should say is, I'm joining the faculty at the University of Oslo part-time because they have the Center for Computational Science Education, and it's starting in physics. And a big part of that work that we're talking about is how do you actually assess. So they've had integrated computation into their physics courses for the last 15 years or something, or 10 years. But they've never actually done any assessment of what their students are able to do as a result. And I would say, students in Norway are a bit different than American students in the sense that their high school experience is quite a bit different. And so they're far more advanced in the sense, in the idea, their intro courses are more like our middle division courses and so forth.
Right.
But that doesn't mean to say that the learning outcomes for those courses wouldn't be relevant, and then the things that we actually build as assessments. So there might be a good time to have sort of an interplay between this community and that one, particularly as we move we're looking to hire 3 people, graduate students or postdocs, to work on these projects. So, in the next few months, it could be a really good time to start laying that groundwork. And I know that the center wants to be a resource for everybody sort of across the world, right? But also sort of wants to connect with communities that are doing this work. And so there might be a better or a stronger connection there than I had originally thought anyway.
Yeah, well, you'll have to, you're obviously the connection there, so you'll have to keep us apprised of the doings.
So are there other things? So I think Kelly said it very nicely, which was that if you were to think of supporting materials, supporting things, right? So the exercise set are one thing to engage your students with, but there's, assessments seem to be a big part of our discussion right now in terms of things that would be needed to support the work that we're doing. But are there other things? Even thinking about getting more people involved, right? Not everybody's going to be able to come to a workshop, for example.
One of the things that came up at the summer workshop relating to that was the putting a set of slides together that people could present to their own departments. So sort of like become an advocate sort of thing. I wonder what those of you who were not at the workshop. Ernie, you were there for the first one, but not for the second one. And David, what would you think about that?
Was thinking about who said it earlier. I suppose I'm coming in completely dry. What a cool idea to do computing in my physics lab. How to do it? Okay. Can somebody show me how to do some Python, maybe roll some balls down a hill, do a Galileo experiment, maybe could I do some friction? And then if I had a couple examples, then I think I could go to my colleagues in the department, which are few in physics-wise, but I have some chemists and some things. So we're not really a physics department. If I had some things in hand and I could experiment with it myself, I'd feel pretty competent about going to colleagues.
David, what about something like almost like a short course, where you'd have some activities, but they're not exercise sets, right? But what they are, they're short courses for faculty who want to get involved. So kind of like software carpentry, or there's a whole bunch of these online, right? The ones where it's like teaching you JavaScript or something like that. Like learn Python in 3 hours.
Yeah. Well, for me, I think I know enough Python. I'm fine with that. But for the average, I think anyone's going to embrace this probably knows a little bit of coding, to first order. But if there were some middle modules I could look at and to see how they were integrated, and then know that they could have an impact. I would try some low risk ways right away if I were teaching intro 1 physics. I could go in tomorrow and try a few things. I don't think I'd make it my whole lesson, but I would make it. Sure. You have a 2-hour lab, I'd like to take up 30, 40 minutes of it, possibly. So for students who probably don't know any code. So I like your idea of presenting to them the code, not it's the exercises to diagnose some Python scripts.
Well, and I think it's a little bit interesting. You said, I think anybody who knows a little bit of code anybody who's going to try this knows a little bit of code. And I would agree with that, but it's also a difficulty of, I know a little bit of code, and maybe that means I can't figure out how much my students can actually inhale as far as coding goes. How much is enough?
Yeah.
I need to support it. There's those other pieces that I think if you just give an exercise set, it can be a little tricky to say, this is how how you might want to try to support this in your class.
I'm just thinking about things like code.org and Scratch. I mean, these kids are getting it in middle school now, and I'm actually teaching some of those. So maybe a few years we won't have this problem, but I've been playing with a toolkit in Scratch because I think they could probably drag and drop pretty easily. But I'd rather them play around in some Python. At least my software engineering students, I think it would be more meaningful. So.
I feel like it's more a question of getting other faculty to use it than to convince the students. I think the students that I've worked with so far have all been really excited to work with code in class. But it's, if you want to integrate it within not just your own classes, that's where maybe we need some resources.
So one of the things I want to show y'all, and I think it relates to something that Marie brought up, but it's a lot. I mean, so I know the person who works on this. It's a lot of work. So this is the FISPort recommendations site. And what this is sort of it's kind of related to the thing that Marie was talking about early on and that Michelle is bringing up now, which are sort of like, how do I do this? And it's talked about from the faculty perspective. And so one thing we could do is we could posit some challenges in one of these Slack channels, right? And then we could have a little conversation about asking somebody to write. You know, if you click on one of these things, it's fairly detailed. I mean, it's a good 2 pages worth of,
Right.
sort of answering the FAQ here. We could do that. I think that would be a good place for people to get started because it's sort of talking from your perspective.
Mm-hmm.
How do I get students to participate in this? How do I talk to my colleagues about this? How do I,
Mm-hmm.
we could posit a number of different things around this, and then sort of include that. I think the longer term idea of these assessments and learning goals sounds like a really good one too. I just think this would be much quicker as a thing to get people involved with.
Yeah, sure.
Had you seen that before, Marie? Is that what you were thinking of?
I don't know that I saw it specifically on that site, but I do know that whenever we've done workshops, one of the things that seems to get the most response from people is the telling of different stories on how you incorporate it, how Kelly does it, how Aaron Titus does it. And I think when you're thinking about how to do it in your own class, just having all of those different models and maybe taking pieces from each makes sense. And one of the people I just met with, the guy at the U of M, was trying to introduce computation in his E&M course. Those were his main questions. It was, this is what I'm trying to do, but I'd like to know what other people do so I can, learn from the advice that they have.
Michelle, do you think it would be just put your, from a perspective of fellow faculty members or other faculty who may not necessarily be skeptical or against the idea, but that just aren't sure how to go about it? Do you think, a series of video testimonies or something that say, here's how I do it. I've done it this way. And you think that would be useful? Or is that too corny of a way to go about it?
I mean, I guess I'm thinking more about faculty who maybe don't know how to code and are, so I don't think that the testimonies will help. I think more of a
practical training thing, huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
Or and some evidence that it's a useful thing. One thing I don't know if we have collectively talked about our learning goal. I mean, we did in the workshop, but what our learning goals are for, like, why do we want to use computation in all of these classes? Right. Because some of the practical reasons, like it's a really good skill to know, this is how you solve a lot of problems in physics. Some faculty may not think that that means that the physics courses are a good place to do that.
Right. So more of a defense or an apology for the approach, right?
Defense, yes.
Yeah. That's something we do in the mini workshops we do at the national meetings. Marie guides a nice little discussion on challenges and benefits of that, and that always has a positive response. So we could I'm not, again, I'm just trying to think what form this would take on the website itself, practically. Maybe.
I think slides are a good idea.
Slides, question and answer, frequently asked questions, something like that.
Yeah.
I think that resources tab is going to end up having some big sort of chunks in it. To me, it seems like that's how it would be organized, right? You'd end up with things like, discussions of learning outcomes, discussions of assessments, discussions of recommendations or FAQs and so forth. And then within each of those, they would have their own sort of like structure to them that's, talking about sort of different, those different things in some detail, because, the kinds of things that I'm hearing there from the group, those are conceptually separate things, right? They have different purposes, and they in principle have different formats. Some would have code, some would not have code, some would have videos, some would have slides and so forth. So I think all of those things are quite valuable, but what we probably need to do is digest all of it and come up with sort of a proposal of a structure for folks of these are the kinds of things that we want to put in here. How do folks feel about that? And what's the low-hanging fruit that we can get started on?
So I'm kind of curious about the initial purpose for the resources tab, because what we're talking about right now seems to have like zero bearing on the one thing that's currently there. So is there, like, does somebody have a motivation that we haven't talked about?
I think Larry was really just trying to learn Markdown.
That's a big part of it, actually. That and Wolfgang was really happy to oblige and have his chapter put up there. So yeah, it was just it was something to fill the thing at the time, and although I think part of the resources may still be, for instance, Wolfgang asked me book resources on computational physics, and he says, the resources tab might be a good place to manage this list. I thought, okay, sure, these type of things. So there may still be technical resources there as far as, that sort of thing. But I like thinking broader as we're doing here. So partially Danny's correct. And Larry was playing to see if he could actually do it or not. And so, but we have, you may remember even at the workshop last summer, I think it was Hunter who asked, he says, maybe we could have some just quick little tutorial thing that points out when each of these algorithms is useful, that sort of thing. And so that could fall under resources, right?
One of the other things I think is definitely something we could put on there. We have to, I don't know if we have to clear it or not. But we could put the results of the national survey on there. It would be on AIP's site. AIP is only willing to put. So for David, I'm not sure if he knows about this. So just a little bit of background. So there's a project that myself and Norman, who's one of the members of the leadership, is on, to do a national survey of faculty and departments to understand how they're using computation, what kind of resources they have to support it, what faculty's perceptions are of it, and so forth. And that's basically wrapped up at this point. We've closed the survey. AIP is processing the data. The thing about AIP that we learned, and I think it's probably obvious to anybody who's looked at an AIP report, they only report facts. So they will report the proportion of people who responded in this way to this question, or they will report the proportion of people who responded in this way to this question intersected with another question. So they will just do cross tabulations. They do not do inferential work. They do not do regression analyses. They do not do anything like that. But I do. So our agreement with them is that we get all the raw data. So in addition to sort of the AIP reporting that we can, post in different places, different kinds of analyses that we would find interesting or useful can also be posted. Things like what I promised in the talk this summer for Kelly's session, what characterizes departments that teach computation, and what are different models of teaching computation we see across the country, right? So AIP would not do that because it involves sort of making judgments about the connections of different questions together different ways and so forth. But they would let us do it, so that could be a resource for people, right? Okay.
Everybody's being very contemplative here.
Yeah.
So I guess there's been things said about throwing out challenges on Slack. I agree with this. I would like, I guess, I have a fantasy of basically having on the resources tab a set of semi-polished videos. I mean, they don't have to be all super. I really like the idea of how I do it videos. That's great.
Mm-hmm.
But some semi-polished videos about some topics that are really core to the intro people. And I think, I think of Kelly's exercise set on the falling ball with air resistance is just a absolute classic kind of core thing. There should be others that should be involved with, I think, fairly simple, or I guess I should say introductory lab experiments.
Mm-hmm.
So I think Dave mentioned the rolling ball, for example.
Yeah.
I think it would be really useful to have a semi-polished video discussing the various platforms and computational tools and when they're appropriate. I mean, I think everybody who's on this call has an idea of that, but if you're coming in cold, you may not, and you want to save some time, right?
Sure.
So I think that could be really useful to someone trying to enter this whole domain.
So Ernie, a couple questions on that just to sort of round it out a little bit. So semi-polished, by that, so the current video that is on our front page, is that what you consider to be semi-polished, or is that less polished?
That's right at about semi-polished.
Fair enough. Okay. Who is the audience for these videos?
I think people who are interested in a vague way about computation, but scared a little bit, and also just don't quite have the lay of the land.
But faculty,
yeah. Right. I am thinking faculty.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. Yes.
No problem.
Right.
I actually think developing some resources that we might want to put in front of our students would be valuable. I know one of the biggest complaints that came from my fall course was, this is a class where, this is a rough quote, this was a class where the professor expects us to do coding without having coding be any prerequisite for the course. And you know, I much like Danny was saying, I didn't have my students writing code from scratch, um, and I was working to scaffold that with my classes. But my chair actually discussed this with me, and I showed him what I was doing, and my chair was like, "Oh, I want our intro students to do this." So you did great, but that doesn't mean that the students don't have those fears going in. And maybe I just need to do a better job preparing them. But I think some resources for the students would be good too.
So one thing I will just add is on the Slack channel, there was a short discussion on, I don't know which one, if it was maybe probably under Jupyter, because we were doing Jupyter notebooks, where Josh submitted some Jupyter notebooks that he gave to his students on the first day of class that kind of introduces Python to them. And then I submitted one that I said was like my version of what he posted, except for my classes, like my intro classes, where we are not coding. Like they are, but like I tell them like throughout the entire semester that you don't have to know how to code, and you're not going to learn how to code, but then they do. It's like I trick them. So like I think that there's like kind of resources like that on the Slack channel that we maybe need to put somewhere else.
That's awesome. Yeah, we should definitely mine those things. One thing that I added for everyone to look at if they're interested in. So one of the things that Steve was mentioning was videos for students. This is the video that I pasted in the chat window is actually from some folks at North Carolina State that they made about, well, probably now it's about 7 or 8 years ago, that they were using in their introductory courses. And there's a series of them, which were all sort of the intro videos for their intro labs. Those are highly polished because, because they were graduate students and didn't want to actually do their research, from what I could tell. But they're, I mean, they're pretty useful for the structure that they had. We used them at Georgia Tech for a little while. I don't think we use them I don't think they use them anymore, but we could think about that too.
So I just opened it, and from my understanding, this visual, like the package isn't called Visual anymore, right? Is that outdated now then?
Yes, these are very old. I mean, not very. They're like, they got to be like 7 or 8 years old. I bet they tell
I
you.
think it says 2009.
Oh, they're even older than I thought. Yeah, so they're 8 years old.
I think it looks awesome if they were up to date. I don't think they would. If someone coded that, it would work.
Yeah. So so we could consider something like that. I mean, those are a lot of work to put together. I know that I think there's 7 of those videos that Sean and John put together, and they took them like an entire semester to put those together.
I wonder if a trinket course would be better. Instead of some videos, do a trinket course and put some code blocks in a narrative text, and then they can work through some activities together.
I think so. I think that's actually a really good idea for what David brought up, which was stuff for faculty, right? So thinking about like getting people started in 3 or 4 hours, you could have trinket courses for those faculty. I mean, in addition to students, but it could be like like you could really clearly make that like a boot camp for folks.
I nominate Aaron to do that, who's not here and can't reject.
Always nominate in absentia.
He'll be happy to know that we've volunteered him for that. He's got a lot of time on his hands these days. Hey, Ron.
Okay. Well, I certainly want to be respectful of people's time, but and I think we have a ton of ideas here. So what I will do is I will go through this document and try to clean it up into sort of some categories of things over the next couple days, and then I'll post that into Slack for people to comment on and so forth. But I think one of the things that we should really try to push for is this this idea of the learning outcomes being a thing that we try to work on as a community.
Sure.
To get that out, because that seems like that would be a really valuable resource, and in fact could be some sort of white paper that we put together as a larger community, to say, we've had a bunch of people talk about this, and here's what it looks like and so forth. And then we can talk about sort of where people want to contribute in other spaces, because there's a lot of really great ideas in this document. Cool.
Yeah. Sounds good.
Thanks for hosting.
I'm feeling quite motivated to learn more, so I'm glad I joined.
Yeah, good. It's been good to have you.
Yeah, awesome, David. Yeah, and we'll see you in April.
Yeah, April 20. Send me one of you send me the date, and I'll get it up on the website.
Okay.
I think Maria, are we confirmed for April 29th? Or are we confirmed for April 29th?
I think we're penciled for April 29th.
Well, once you're confirmed, give me the go ahead when you're confirmed. All right.
Yeah.
But
after this Thursday's meeting.
We should know, right, by Thursday. Yeah.
Is this thing you're wanting to do not connected to a regional meeting? That's what this is?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
David and Tony are planning.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
All right. I'm going to stop the recording now.